Hi guys, and welcome back to Drive to School Chat, where we discuss a subtopic in geography on our way to school. Today I'd like us to talk about Longshore Drift and the depositional landforms that are formed along coastlines. So the first thing that we're going to begin with is discuss what Longshore Drift is. And simply put, Longshore Drift is the movement of sand along the coastline in the direction of the prevailing wind. So let's talk about a couple of things there. So the first thing is the prevailing wind. And the prevailing wind here, we are talking actually about the prevailing wind direction. And the prevailing wind is the wind that blows often over an area. So it's the wind that is blowing most of the time, and it's the direction from that which the direction from which that wind is blowing that we are interested here, or we are interested in here when we are talking about Longshore Drift, because it is that prevailing wind direction that is going to determine how sediment or material is going to be moved along that particular coastline. Then the other things that we need to talk about before we carry on, or the other things that we need to discuss, the first one is swash. And swash is when water washes up the beach. Then we have backwash, which is when the water washes down the beach. So let's get started then with Longshore Drift. Now we've just said that Longshore Drift is the movement of sediment or material along the coastline in the direction of the prevailing wind. Now when we are talking about Longshore Drift, the wind will arrive at an angle at the coast, and that will have been predetermined by the direction of that prevailing wind. So if it's a southwesterly wind, for example, then it means that that wind, okay, so let's just call it southeasterly wind. So if it's a southeasterly wind, then that wind will be blowing from the southeast. So it will arrive from the southeast. And when it arrives on the beach, it's going to be washed up the beach in a northwesterly direction because it's coming from the southeast. So the swash is going to be in a northwesterly direction. Now that material, obviously, if it's a pebble or other sediment that is being carried, it's going to be washed up that beach in that direction, and then it's going to backwash. There's going to be backwash rather. So it's going to wash back into the sea, but this time round not in the direction of the prevailing wind, but at a right angle to the coastline. So up in the direction, swash in the direction of the Longshore Drift, and then backwash at a right angle. Then it's going to be washed up again, swash again in the direction of the Longshore Drift, then backwash, and in so doing, material is going to be moved along the coastline. And that's why we are saying it's movement of material. Longshore Drift is movement of material along a coastline in the direction of the prevailing wind. Okay, so now that means that if material is being moved, then some areas may end up with the beach being depleted of material, because if the material is being moved along, it means that some areas are likely to be depleted of that material, or that beach material. And we know that that beach is the initial line of defense for any coastline. So it's your basic protection at the coast. So if it's moved, then it means that you now do not have that protection any longer. And that is why in the UK and in many other parts of the world, sea defenses are put into place to ensure that this material is not being carried away, and especially in areas that are valuable. So areas that have got, say, settlements, have got you know, like gas terminals, which we are likely to find on the coastline. You know, so it's a kind of industry because it is producing electricity. I mean, it's producing gas and so on. So if it's a valuable area, it's a tourist attraction maybe, and it has tourist resorts, then it's worth protecting, and it's valuable, and therefore you have to protect it from that depletion of sand. So groins are put into place to protect such an area. Now, the problem with that, however, is that it may cause terminal groin syndrome further along the coastline, which means that if all the sand is trapped by those groins on that particular part of the coastline, then other parts are not going to be protected, and therefore they are likely to be depleted a lot faster. But we'll talk about that at a different time when we talk about coastal management. Right. So that is longshore drift. Now, what depositional landforms are caused, especially as a result of longshore drift? Now, we need to mention here that the waves, which are the main process at the coast that is causing erosion, transportation and deposition, they will do three main jobs, and I've just mentioned those jobs. So they will erode the coastline, then they will move that material, so erosion, transportation, and deposition. That is what the waves do, and in so doing, they create landforms along that particular coastline. So that then means, right now then, we are going to talk about some of those depositional landforms that are created by longshore drift. Okay, the first one is a spit. A spit is an extension of land out into the open water. Now, why does that happen? Now, when you come to the end of the coastline, longshore drift is still likely to continue to happen, and especially where you have shallow, calm waters. That will just mean that that spit will continue, not the spit, but the longshore drift will continue to carry material along that particular coastline and deposit it after the land has ended out into the open water, into those shallow and calm waters. And that extension of land that will have been created by that deposited sand or material is what we are calling a spit. Now, that spit then sometimes will experience or will be subject rather to a change in wind direction. And that is mainly because that particular coastline has come to an end. So if there is a change in wind direction, then that will mean that that spit may be pushed in a different direction. So that sand will be pushed in a different direction. And the end of that particular spit is likely to curve. And that kind of curve is what we call a recurved end at the end of the spit. And it's also referred to as a hook. So in terms of depositional landforms, now we've talked about a spit, which is an extension of land out into the open water, like we've just said. And then we have a hook or a recurved end of that particular spit. That's a second landform that you could actually talk about. Then behind that spit, so the spit has formed, but behind the spit, you're likely to have a very low energy environment in terms of the water that is present there. And because of that low energy environment, you're likely to have a lot of material being deposited there. Now, that material will still be subject to some water from the sea, but because a spit is blocking that water from the waves from affecting that area and causing that water to be in motion, the one behind the spit, then you will get a salt marsh developing there, a very low energy environment. And in the salt marsh is likely to be colonized by rare plants, plants that are can grow in a salty environment. Now those plants are also likely to attract rare species of, say, birds and small animals into the area. Okay, so that then becomes a new habitat for plants and animals. The salt marsh does. So far we've talked about a spit, the way it's formed by Longshore Drift, and then we've talked about a hook as well, which is a second landform on the spit, and then we have talked about salt marshes behind the spit. Now we have a few other depositional landforms, and the first one that I'd like us to mention here is a bar. Now a bar is formed when you have Longshore Drift going all the way across a bay. So you have a bay, and we know a bay is an area that has you have bays and headlands which are created at a discordant coastline, and the bay is the area that has got softer rock that erodes a lot faster and therefore curves inwards, right? So because it's curved inwards, the land is further in compared to the sides of that particular bay, which are likely to be sticking out and which are headlands. So the bay is sheltered. However, if you have Longshore Drift along that coastline, the Longshore Drift may carry sand all the way across that bay and actually block that bay off. Now when that happens, this sand that is blocking that bay off is what we call a bar. So that is the other depositional landform that is created by Longshore Drift. Now again, behind the bar, you will still have water, and that water will be a low energy environment again because it's been blocked off. It's no longer being accessed by the sea that easily, or by the waves, if you like. So behind that spit then, excuse me, behind the bar, you will then have a lagoon forming. And that's another depositional landform that is created by Longshore Drift along the coastline. So, bar, material that has been deposited by Longshore Drift across a bay, and then behind that particular bar, you have a lagoon forming. All right. The next depositional landform is a tombolo. So a tombolo is where a spit joins an island to the mainland. All right. Then what then is the next depositional landform? So the next depositional landform this time round is what we call sand dunes. Now sand dunes are not necessarily formed by a spit. So sand dunes are just formed by sand being blown onto the land. Now we have what are referred to as onshore winds. So these are winds that are arriving onto the coastline from the sea. So those winds are likely to push sand or material that is on the beach further inland. And as that happens, you now have those sand dunes because they are accumulations of sand that are further they're sort of further inland into the coast, and sand just keeps being blown there, and therefore it accumulates over time. So that's what sand dunes are. Now those sand dunes again are likely to be colonized by plants, and when that happens, it then means that those sand dunes are now going to be a little firmer because the plants are going to hold those particles of sand together. And over time, you may end up having a bigger sand dune, and the sand dunes will continue to develop inland as a result, or further inland as a result, until you get, to the mature dunes. Okay, but that is, a topic of discussion for some other time. Right now, what we need to know is about sand dunes being a depositional landforms on a coastline. Okay then, so what have we talked about this morning? So we have talked about longshore drift and depositional landforms along the coastline. And we said that longshore drift is the movement of sand along the coast in the direction of the prevailing wind. So the swash comes in at an angle, and then the backwash at a right angle, and in so doing, the longshore drift will carry material along a coastline, or sediment along a coastline. Then we've talked about depositional landforms. The first one we've talked about is a spit. Then we talked about a hook on that spit. Then we talked about a salt marsh behind that spit. Then we talked about a bar, which is when sand is deposited by longshore drift across a bay. Then behind the bay, you have the formation of a lagoon. Then the next landform was a tombolo, which is where sand joins an island to the mainland. And then lastly, we've talked about sand dunes, which are formed as sand is blown onto the coastline by onshore winds. Okay then, so that brings us to the end of this Drive to School chat. Thank you very much for joining me in this journey towards excellent exam results. If you have a topic that you'd like us to discuss on the way to school, please do let me know in the comments section below, and we will be sure to discuss it one of these fine mornings on our way to school. All the best, and see you again soon. Bye-bye.